Hi, and welcome to the Wine Enthusiast podcast, your serving of wine trends and passionate people beyond the bottle. I'm Christina Pickard, Wine Enthusiast's contributing editor for Australia and New Zealand. And in this episode, I'll be talking with native Aussie Tim Harris, the owner of New York City's Burke & Wills and the Manhattan Cricket Club, the former of which boasts one of America's greatest Australian wine lists. Tim and I will be talking Aussie Shiraz, from its spiritual home in the Barossa to the renegade Victorian winemakers bringing it to life outside Melbourne, to the spicy, savory, cool climate expressions being crafted in Australia's most remote winemaking region. Let's explore Australia's most famous grape variety in its many guises, and let it open the door to more adventures in the incredibly diverse and exciting winemaking country that is Australia. Tim Harris, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thanks, Christina. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, we're going to talk all about Australian Shiraz. And as we record this, it's morning time. Shiraz is probably the last thing both of us feel like having in our glass right now.
I don't know. Speak for
if
yourself.
We're honest. So you have a lot of experience, obviously, with Australian Shiraz in America. And so I want to talk to you more about how it's perceived here. But first of all, just going right back to the beginning about what Australian Shiraz is. For those people who don't know, Shiraz is the same grape variety, of course, as Syrah. And it's still a bit of a mystery as to why Australians have termed it Shiraz. It was actually a winemaking region in Iran. Back in like the 9th century. It was actually considered a very fine winemaking region at that time, but there's not really a whole lot of reason that we can understand as to why the Aussies adopted the term Shiraz, because actually that style was more like a sherry. Now more and more producers are starting to call some Shiraz Syrah to delineate style differences. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about today is this idea of distinctive styles that have emerged in Australia, because I think for a lot of American drinkers, and you can confirm or deny this, but a lot of American drinkers would associate Shiraz as being from South Australia, more specifically from Barossa. Starting with that style, I guess, what are the perceptions that you've come across being on the restaurant and bar side of things? Do people ask a lot specifically for Barossa Shiraz or just for an Australian Shiraz?
It's definitely the easiest conversation to have, say, at a table with guests, I think, because it is out of all of the wine coming out of Australia. And, Australia is, to put it in perspective, it's a big wine industry. It's the 5th largest exporter of wine in the world. There's over 60, designated regions that encompass this huge amount of microclimates and terroir and all this kind of stuff. So there is diversity there, but and getting to that conversation is a challenge sometimes, but being able to do that through the lens of Shiraz is kind of a really great entry point. So people do, when they think of Australian wine, most of the time they think about Shiraz and they think about South Australian Shiraz. So it is a great starting off point. Some people, just definitely want that style. They want, that classic Australian style that you just described, bold wines, a little bit fruit forward, bit of oak influence, and they feel comfortable with that. They understand that. So I guess for me, and also I think it's knowing the kind of American palate for the most part that's coming to a restaurant like mine. Often these people are drinking, bigger style like California Cabernets and big Italian reds and stuff like that they go for. So Shiraz is a natural progression from that. They're going to understand it. It's going to be what they're looking for. And there's plenty of options in that category. But I really like it as a jumping off point to say, okay, well, if you like that style, here are all these other styles that are coming out of Australia that, you might like to try.
Absolutely. And we're gonna dive into those other styles soon. I want to just stick with the Barossa thing just for a little bit, because I think it's still, even if it is the most well-known style and region for Americans. And as you say, a very good jumping off point to explore other styles. It's also it's the most planted grape variety in Australia. It's South Australia. It is very much their calling card, and it has a really rich history in Barossa. So I think it is still something that, we should be celebrating. And it's always easy, and I'm the first person to be play victim to this, to say, oh, well, what's the next new thing? But I think it's still a very important part of Australian culture, these wines, even if they, some of these bigger, bolder wines are maybe not quite as fashionable as maybe more lower alcohol, fresher styles. But, like you say, there's still styles that a lot of people drink and love, and we can still be celebrating them, particularly for the history that they have in a place like Barossa. Australia plays home to some of the oldest grape varieties some of the oldest vines on the planet. Are there any other producers in that more classic style that you like to recommend, or that you find that people are asking for?
Yeah, 100%. I think you touched on a great point that I was going to bring up is these amazing old vines that are in the Barossa, and the wines that are coming from these. I mean, definitely we should be, and we are celebrating these amazing wines because they have such history. And I think Robert Hill Smith, who is the owner of Yalumba, said to me at a tasting once, and I kind of want to get this quote right for him, but he said, "Old vines are old because they're good, not good because they're old." And I thought that was a really good quote. So if vines aren't producing great quality, then they're getting pulled out and replanted. But you've got these really gnarly old vines with roots going way down, and they produce just these really deep wines that age beautifully and all that kind of stuff. So we definitely should still be celebrating this style, and there are so many producers making amazing wines. One that I really love and recommend and support a lot is Tim Smith, who's making some amazing Shiraz, but also an amazing sort of Mataro forward Rhone blend, and some really great Grenache as well, out of the Barossa. And obviously the Yalumba family, very old, family owned, big winery.
It's a big winery, but I think it's the oldest family owned in Australia, and they have a huge range of wines, and they're always kind of blow me away by, I think they've got a brand new range out, the Samuel's collection, which actually, so there's a specific wine that I thought that we should chat a little bit about, and that is Yalumba's Octavius Old Vine, the 2013, which is not a cheap wine. It's $135. So let's be honest, this is a special occasion wine. But there's another one, Yalumba Samuel's collection. This is a new range that they have recently launched. That's only $20. So for those of us who cannot afford $135 every day, which is probably most of us, the $20 one is also really just balanced, drinkable, really beautiful example of Barossa's most famous wine style. But the Octavius, for if you really want to go there and you really want to try one of these sort of, I hate the term, but iconic big Barossa wines, I think this is a really great place to start. And it's. I mean, are you familiar with this wine or this style?
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually had a chance to do a vertical of Octavius a few years ago, and I think the great thing about Shiraz in general is that because they are these richer, fuller body wines, a lot of them are amazing to drink young. You don't need years and years of age on these wines to make them approachable. You can grab that $20 bottle of wine off the shelf and it's going to be great. It's you can have it with all sorts of food, and you're going to smash that bottle easily. But the Octavius, it is, as you said, one of those iconic wines. I think it was definitely, the style was born out of a time, and when I talk to guests about what defines Australian cuisine and Australian dining and this sort of stuff, I always tell people I think it follows our various waves of immigration to Australia. Australia, a relatively young country and settled by the British, but sort of around the First and Second World War, there was a huge influx of people from the Mediterranean that have really defined Australia from a culinary and a wine point of view. And these styles of wines, these big bold red wines, were what was popular, and especially with the British, and then and eating these sort of heavier style foods, and then people from the Mediterranean, Greeks and Italians, and they brought all their amazing food, which pairs well with the Australian climate, and also these bolder style wines. So
because let's be honest, as much as I think a lot of us are going towards maybe like fresher, cooler climates, styles of wine, Barossa is not a cool climate. It's not maybe as sort of baking hot as it often gets stereotyped as. They do say that that it has a pretty broad diurnal temperatures, and of course it depends on where, because there's a whole other podcast we'll have to save for Barossa's subregions and its diversity of soils, and of course you have much warmer climates in some pockets of Barossa than you do in others. You go up to Eden Valley, and then you get cooler still. Of course, Clare Valley, which is its own region, you get even cooler. So that's sort of a whole other discussion. But we're not expecting Barossa to start making suddenly these 12% super fresh wines. Like, they are always going to be fairly medium to full bodied, fuller style. So for people who like that style, this is a region that is certainly has a very long history and hundreds of years of experience with making wines of this style. Of course, it started fortified. Barossa is one of the only areas. Speaking of British, it does have British influence, but it also has this Silesian influence, this German side, which is if you go to Barossa, is very, very prevalent there, particularly within all of the little towns. But yeah, of course, the drinking culture in Australia is very much associated with a British culture. For a long time, the Australians, were exporting fortified wines to Britain, and Shiraz was, of course, playing a big part in that. But Australia had sort of a big learning curve. There was, I think, one point where the British said, "Okay, thank you for all those fortified wines, but we no longer need them anymore. We, the wars are over. We will start to continue to import from Europe." And Australia had to kind of take a good hard look at itself and go, "Oh, well, there goes most of our market." And of course, dry table wine sort of slowly came out of that, amongst other things. So let's move on. Let's go outside the box here and move on to a different style of Shiraz and a different climate. Where should we go next? Should we go to Victoria, maybe?
Sure. That's where I'm from.
That's where you're from. Oh yeah, we should. Yeah, because of course you have the accent to go along with this podcast far better than I do. So where are you from, actually? I want to hear your story. A little tangent here. How you ended up in the States too.
Yeah, so I'm from a little town called Queenscliff in southern Victoria. Grew up in the restaurant business. One of my regulars our regulars at the family restaurant was the owner of a producer called Scotchman's Hill, and he asked me what I was doing on the weekends one day, and I said, nothing, and he said, "Well, come and work in my vineyard." So then I went on to work in the vineyard, and my sort of love affair with wine started there. Then decided to leave a great job I had with the restaurant group in Melbourne and jump on a plane and come to America. I planned on coming for 3 months, and that was 12 years ago.
How did Americans, I guess, react to Australian wine? How have you seen it change in the last decade or last 12 years? And is it changing still, do you think?
Absolutely. I think, and I don't want to highlight this point because I think we've got so far past it, but it's always in the conversation when you talk to people who've been around wine and Australian wine for a fair amount of time that there was this influx, I guess, in the 80s and 90s to the States of what I call the critter wines. The wines with some little Aussie critter on the label. They were cheap. They were pretty simplistic. Over the top wines, very obvious in what they were. They were mass produced, and they sort of set the table, I guess, for Aussie wine for a long time. And it's taken a while to get out of that. There's also issues with trade and foreign exchange rates and things like that, which is a whole nother conversation that affected imports and so on. But over the last 10 years that I've been heavily involved with Aussie wine here, it's definitely changed. The pure amount of producers that are coming from Australia now, the amount of Aussie wine in suppliers have, and then people are slowly adopting it onto wine lists in wine stores. It's still got a long way to go to be as recognizable as some other international wines, but definitely evolving. When I get to touch tables and talk to people in detail about it, they love exploring it. They love the opportunity to say, okay, well, wow, Australia isn't just this; it's all of this as well. So let's have a conversation, which is awesome.
Well, that leads nicely into exploring other regions in Australia. Let's zero in. Speaking of all of these regions, one of the biggest regions in Victoria is the Yarra Valley. So just, I think, like 30 minutes drive, isn't it, outside of Melbourne. So it's really, you could almost call it an urban wine region. It's so close to the city, but when you're out there, you feel like you've been transported to a completely different world. It definitely feels rural. I think there are some problems with urban development there, with the city creeping in. But for now, anyway, it still feels like a pretty rural part of Victoria. And it is cool climate. It may not be sort of as maritime and as cool as a place like, say, Mornington Peninsula, where Pinot Noir would be their specialty there. So because of that, the Yarra has never really hung its hat on one grape variety. It's excelled at lots of different grape varieties. It makes a wonderful Pinot Noir and wonderful Chardonnay. It makes some Sauvignon Blanc, and it makes some really great Cabernet Sauvignon. And of course, it also makes really good Shiraz. And here, I think probably more than any other region, I'm seeing it called Syrah. And then can you talk, Tim, a little bit about why winemakers in Australia with something like Shiraz, which is so synonymous with Australia, why they would choose to throw that name out and call it Syrah? Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, I think the main reason is to differentiate a different style, and that style being probably and I don't like to. I'm trying to get out of the conversation of comparing Australian wine to something else. I think that we've evolved past that to say it's like this or it's like that, but I think in this case it's using the French term to differentiate a style that is sort of more Rhone in style. So a little bit more savory, maybe lighter alcohol, less oak influence, less winemaking, I guess, influence, and letting the wine speak a little bit more about terroir. Would be, why these producers are calling it Syrah as opposed to Shiraz.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that I completely understand that temptation of not wanting to just automatically go, they're calling it because it's like Northern Rhone, but it probably is an easy way to initially understand is like, okay, this style is maybe a little bit less like that richer, more sort of muscular, structured style that we were talking about that's coming out of places like Barossa, but, it is sort of an easy, just sort of one-liner way to go, all right, if I see Syrah on a bottle of Australian red versus Shiraz, probably I can sort of, in my head, go, it's going to be maybe a little closer to a Northern Rhone in style, maybe a little bit spicier, a little bit lower alcohol. And then you're right to touch upon also a lot of the producers that are using it are producers who are, maybe working with a little bit less intervention, a little bit more, along the lines of like that natural line, right? Being a little bit more terroir expressive, I guess, if we can say that. So the Yarra also has so many exciting producers that are just really shaking things up in Australia in general. And the list is so long in the Yarra, I don't even really know where to start. But I guess let's talk first about Luke Lambert, about a specific wine, this Luke Lambert Syrah. It's a 2017. It's about $65, so that's another conversation to have. Some of these smaller producers are not cheap, so that is definitely something that's difficult, and I don't know if you find this as well, but often I'm recommending wines and going, by the time they get over here and everybody takes their cut along the way, these wines can be quite expensive. Is that something that you find is a little bit of an uphill battle sometimes too?
getting that, yes, I agree with you, but having that, I think Shiraz is probably the easiest way to, trying to convince someone to pay $150 at a table for a Tasmanian Pinot Noir that they've never heard of before is a bit of a challenge. But, having someone pay the same price for an Australian Shiraz, especially something from the Barossa in those older styles, is an easier conversation.
Because it's just interesting that you use like Pinot Noir as an example, because for me that, often people are willing to pay more because there's this sort of prestige, this association with Burgundy. But as you say, it's also, if it's from a region that people haven't heard of, then that's a lot harder. That's just something that we have to accept with these smaller producers. And, usually the smaller guys, more is actually going directly into their pocket. Yes, there's a lot of people along the way who are taking cuts, but, these are guys, somebody like Luke Lambert would not have a marketing team behind him or, this is a guy who's like growing his own grapes and making his own wine and selling his own wine and doing his own promotion. And he's definitely small batch artisan producer. Can you talk a little bit about Luke Lambert specifically? Do you know him as a winemaker and his wines?
Yeah, I've met Luke a couple of times and love what he's doing. He's very unashamedly doing what he's doing and his style. He's finding these cool little, sometimes what bigger producers would consider lesser quality pockets of the Yarra Valley. Areas that are challenging, these little rocky little outcrops and really cooler areas, and growing this like really amazing, like throw out all the history and all the tradition of of traditional Shiraz Syrah winemaking, and just doing it his own way, and I love that.
What's the hottest new trend in wine cellars? VinoView by Wine Enthusiast. VinoView will change how you cool and display your favorite wines. The patented matrix shelf design displays wine labels forward to showcase your favorite bottles. It comes standard with 12 built-in rolling shelves, each comfortably holding 12 750ml bottles of all shapes and sizes. With a 155 bottle capacity, VinoView is the only wine cellar of this type that can hold the number of bottles it advertises, guaranteed. And it's not only sleek in design, it also has a state-of-the-art compressor cooling performance. Wine Enthusiast VinoView is available exclusively from the Wine Enthusiast catalog. Visit wineenthusiast.com and find out why customers are calling VinoView awesome, beautiful, and a must-have product. To experience VinoView, visit wineenthusiast.com or call one of our experienced wine storage experts at 800-356-8466.
We're only going to have time really to talk about three different styles of Shiraz, different regions in Australia that are doing it. But keep in mind that this is a great variety that is planted all over the country, and there are so many producers doing really cool stuff with it. But let's just move west and just talk really briefly about all the way across the country. This is like a 5-hour flight. It's the equivalent of going from New York to Los Angeles, all the way over to Western Australia, to the most remote wine region in Australia, the Great Southern, which is this vast swath of land. It's 5 different subregions down there. It's massive. You don't really quite know if you've entered it or left it. It's a bit like Los Angeles in that way. Like, am I in the Great Southern, or have I actually made it here? It's massive. Have you been there before?
I have been. Yeah, I've been to the region. And after your 5-hour flight from Sydney, you've then got a 5-hour drive
right, from Perth,
south to get to these places. And if you ever get the opportunity to go there, it's one of the most pristine places that I've ever been to on the planet.
And they make incredible wines. I mean, that's the even more amazing part, is that they make. They've been a little bit of an underdog region because of their remoteness. It's hard to get people down there, but I think when they do, they really fall in love with the region and the wines. And so this is truly cool climate winemaking in Australia. So of course, cool climate, they do amazing Riesling and amazing Pinot Noir, but Shiraz, particularly in the most inland region in Franklin River, is really beautiful, savory style, and a really excellent example of a style that couldn't be any more opposite, really, from South Australia, but that Australia as a whole is also doing really well. So in Franklin River, I would say the probably the most famous winery there, and definitely the most lauded, would be Franklin Estate, who are working organically and just have a really beautiful philosophy about winemaking. Always very terroir expressive. A lot of the times I'll taste Franklin Estates wines and go, they're beautiful, but they would be even more beautiful if we gave them, another, not long. I mean, sometimes they just need a few years, 3-5 years. But I think their Shiraz, the 2015 is the one we're going to talk about today. It's $40, which, when you think about some of these Shiraz that, take decades to age, it's definitely a more restrained, medium-bodied style. I'll let you talk more about I'm talking too much about it. I'll let you talk more about Franklin Estate and about Shiraz from Great Southern.
Yeah, look, I love this style, and and earlier I was talking about how the Australian palate and culinary world has evolved over time, and I think as we move further on, and you're really seeing this in Australia now, is we saw a big wave of immigration from Southeast Asia, sort of after the Vietnam War, I guess, and the influence of Asian cuisine on Australia has been huge, and I think wines like this, like the Franklin Estate, and there's other producers down there like Alcumi are doing great stuff, really fitting to this like fresher, spicy food, and they go really well with that type of cuisine. Some of the Franklin Estate wines, might need a minute, but not that long.
Not that long. No, it always amazes me how, I'll taste them young and go, oh, these are going to need so much time. And then I might taste it like the previous vintage or only 2 vintages before, and suddenly they've just blossomed. So often it's just a case of even leaving them a year or two. Anyway, Tim, we are going to have to wrap this up. But this has been such a nice conversation about a great variety that is, well-known, but not so well-known, right? In a lot of ways, there's still so much to be explored and to be uncovered. So I think everybody should go out and try lots of different kinds of Aussie Shiraz or Syrah, and hopefully it'll just open the door to the diversity of Australia that Australia has to offer in general.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a fun way to dive into Australian wine and explore it, and it really has defined Australian wine for so long, and will continue to do so. So there's so many winemakers out there that are taking it really, really seriously and exploring with it. So it's an exciting time to drink Aussie Shiraz and Aussie wine in general.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Tim.
Thanks so much, Christina.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Wine Enthusiast podcast. We hope you learned a little something about Aussie Shiraz and that we've got you thirsty enough to pour yourself a glass. 3 of the recently reviewed Shiraz that we mentioned in this podcast that are worth picking up are Yalumba the Octavius Old Vine 2013, 94 points from the Barossa Valley and $135. Or for a more everyday drinking Shiraz, try Yalumba's Samuel's Collection, a new range out from them this year, for $20. Luke Lambert Syrah 2017, 92 points from the Yarra Valley for $65. And Franklin Estate Shiraz 2015, 92 points from the Great Southern for $40. And watch for the 2016 review coming soon. Head to winemag.com for full reviews. Subscribe to the Wine Enthusiast podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you find your podcasts. And if you liked today's episode, we'd so appreciate a 5-star review and comment. And please tell your friends to check us out too. For more wine reviews, recipes, guides, and stories, visit Wine Enthusiast online at winemag.com. The Wine Enthusiast podcast is produced by Marina Vitage and Jenny Groza. Until next episode, cheers!